The primary way that I coped with living in an emotionally neglectful and just unhealthy, traumatic childhood home was to blame myself. Um, and the specific narratives that I had around that was one, that there was just something like inherently wrong with me. Like I was just like an alien, or I don't know, there's something like innately strange or unrelatable to me that caused people to not be able to empathize with me, connect with me, be emotionally supportive of me. And also that I was extremely sensitive, like, I guess in my head would almost be like pathologically sensitive, like sensitive to this ridiculous degree that was just absurd, that trying to cope with normal things was extremely difficult for me and it just shouldn't have been. And yeah, so that's how I made sense of my childhood and um, found ways to blame myself. And I have come to understand that it's very normal for people in traumatized family systems to find some way to blame themselves as kids, because it's really difficult for a kid to blame their parents. And so that kind of leaves them having to blame themselves. And there's different ways that people go about doing that. But those were my two storylines in my head. And doing therapy, trauma therapy, for almost 2 years now, I've gotten better and better at leaving those old narratives behind more of the time. And I'm doing a better job of recognizing that the situation was messed up, that my reactions to things actually made sense given the circumstances, and so on. But because I've used those narratives for basically my whole life, minus the last 2 years, when I'm really struggling, it feels pretty instinctual for me to go back into those thinking patterns, because that's how I know how to cope with the situation. And of course, I'm trying to resist letting myself think that way. But sometimes I still struggle with that. And something that just really hit me this week was that when I'm in that mindset of thinking I was the problem, that I was just too sensitive, and that the situation I was in was relatively normal, and that I, quote unquote, should have just been able to cope and been fine despite the circumstances, what that is really doing is blaming the child version of me. It's not blaming me now, because I haven't been in those circumstances in years. And some of my trauma comes back to the very few times that I ever tried to express my pain and seek help. It wasn't believed or empathized with or taken seriously enough. And that really added to the pain of the situation I was experiencing to begin with. And when I think about it, it's like the last person I want to be is yet another person who would dismiss and invalidate that little girl version of me who desperately needed somebody to believe her. And yet, that's what I do sometimes when I revert back to that old thinking of blaming myself. And so it's been helpful to just remind myself that that's really what I'm talking about, is 7-year-old me, 10-year-old me, 12-year-old me. And when I do that, it's so much easier to maintain the perspective that I want to maintain, that I was not the person to blame, and that I deserve empathy and compassion, and that what I was doing was my best at the time.